This is the Second Studio, hosted by the Architecture and Design Office fame. My name is David Lee, and with me is Marina Borderonnet. The two of us are partners at the office and, of course, hosts of this show. And this week, it's the two of us in the Second Studio, and we are going to talk about a few things that we each love about architecture and design.
Oh, I can't wait to hear what it is that you love
it's
about
partially
architecture.
because we did the pet peeves, so we figured, right, maybe we'll do something on the opposite side of that coin. And what are we going to talk about? What are the things? We'll have to find out. Sponsors.
If you need to get 2D or 3D as-builts of a project, then check out Canvas. Canvas is an iPhone and iPad app that you can use to scan a house, let's say, and it gets processed as an as-built file, so you don't have to do any measuring. The file formats include ArchiCAD, Revit, AutoCAD, Vectorworks, SketchUp, and others. It's been a great tool for us, and I know many of you will find it very helpful. So visit canvas.io/SSP or click the link in our show notes to schedule a demo and to get your first as-built free.
We are supported by Enscape. Enscape is a real-time visualization and VR tool that we personally use and recommend. Now, why do we like it? Well, it's fast and realistic, but it's also really easy to use. The interface is great, it has a strong library of components, and it renders in real time, which means we don't have to waste time waiting for the image to be rendered to see what it will look like. It's also a plugin that works with all of the major 3D modelers, and it's available for Mac and PC. So if you want to up your visualization and rendering game, then definitely check out Enscape by clicking the Enscape 3D link in our show notes. Are you interested in a computer program that combines construction drawings and 3D modeling in one software and in one model? If so, then you should check out the BIM program ArchiCAD. ArchiCAD leads the industry by enabling architectural and interior design firms around the world to freely design, supported by innovative technology that expands as far as the imagination can stretch. Check it out by clicking on the ArchiCAD link in our show notes. This is the Second Studio with Marina and myself. Here we go. I feel like this is a PBS children's show. Today we have an architect, kids. Dear architect, why do you love architecture? You know?
Well, so I think one of the things that I do love about architecture, and I feel like it could be something that people love about what they do in maybe in other professions. What I love about it is that I'm always learning something. And I think that would be maybe one of the biggest criteria if I had to switch field or job.
It's fine.
It surprised me.
Yeah, it's a motorcycle. It's fine.
If I had to ever switch field or job, like what would that be and what would be one of the most important criteria? And it would be to make sure that every day at that job, I'm learning something new. Like the repetition of the same task over and over and over and over without any changes, without any new thing that comes up, is just something that I could never, ever do. So that's one of the big one.
But couldn't you say that, you know, after you've designed X number of buildings, that there's a lot of information that carries over from one to the next, and so
there
it becomes
is, but
less
each
new?
building is always different. Each client is different. Each site is different. There is always something that's gonna make it a different mix.
Okay, so that's another way to phrase my question is, or what are some of the things that you learn or have learned more recently on projects? Like, give us an example of what you're saying.
Well, I gave you the first point. Hello.
You have to be able to expand on this.
I mean, it could be something silly, like you just you're looking at a construction detail differently this time because you've done it one time this way, and now you're doing it again, and you just think you've learned from what you've done, what you've built, and you figure there is better ways to do it. There is different ways to do it, and you're just trying it differently the next time, right? So if you're rejecting what you've done before, let's say, and you're like, okay, I've done that detail this way before, I want to try and do it differently, and I have that option. I have to figure it out, right? So you're learning how to do it differently.
Okay, so details, you said the sites are different, the people are different, as in the clients you named.
Materials. You always learn about new materials, new techniques. I mean, like there is a zillion ways you can design and build things. So that's another one of them. Yeah, clients too.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that. Learning new things every time. It's funny, we were talking with a number of friends who were architects and now they've transitioned to other things, sometimes related. It's pretty common for architects to become real estate agents or developers or go on the construction side of things. I think that's becoming more common in the millennial generation and younger for people to transition because of just the economics of the profession, which is not great. But for those people, one of the things that they find themselves needing out of their next career, let's call it, is something that's going to be fulfilling, and specifically something that's going to allow them to learn new things pretty consistently as you do in architecture. And there's a lot of professions that do offer that, but there's also a lot of professions that don't offer that kind of excitement from problem solving new things all the time. And I would agree, that's one of the things that I love about it, but it's also one of the more painful aspects of it. Like, not everyone's built to want to enjoy problem solving things. And it's not always enjoyable also, which is the funny thing. Sometimes it is frustrating because that's the nature of solving a new problem that you're presented with, is that there's going to be some friction of trying to figure it out. But it's also satisfying. It's a weird kind of almost like perverse, love-hate kind of situation. Like, there's a certain amount of pain that you go through with this kind of thinking or again, problem solving that is enjoyable. But I think it's also maybe one of the differences between, it might be one of the things that the general public or soon-to-be architects don't know about architecture and architects, is that every project is different. And it's said pretty often. It almost becomes kind of like a cliche to say, because many of the people we've interviewed will say that as well. We're site-specific. Every project is different, but it really is the case, and it is also at the same time very easy for any architect to decrease the amount of education that occurs in new projects. In other words, it's very easy to repeat what you've done in the past. Take the same details, and more established offices have, even younger offices have a library. They call it a CAD library, right? A library of their standard details that they use and they've evolved over the years, and they just kind of copy and paste them into projects. And there are times where it makes sense, for sure, but I think there's also a danger philosophically with that approach. If you allow that kind of, again, way of thinking to bleed on to the rest of your details for a project or other aspects of the project, then pretty soon you end up becoming kind of like a cookie cutter.
Or an AI.
You're just doing like versions of yourself you already did before. And that's that's a tricky thing, right? Because then at that point you wonder, is that architect, are they honing their craft, right? That's let's say the positive way of looking at it. Is that what they're doing, or are they lazy now? And it's sort of like, who's to know in some ways, but I will say there's a lot of offices who do really good work, and on the outside it looks like they're honing their craft, and the sales pitch they give to people when they're being interviewed is, we're honing our craft and every project is so different. But behind the scenes, no, you're just kind of copying stuff.
I also wonder like how much of that has to do with the amount of volume of work that they're like turning in,
Yeah.
Because if you're a small shop, you only have 10 projects a year, let's say, well, you probably want to try a bunch of different things, right? But if you're a big office and you have hundreds of projects at a time, you're probably not going to make them each different. Like, there is going to be overlap, there is going to be repetition, there is going to be reusing things that were done in other projects just to make the process more efficient, or because it works well and why not reuse it, right?
Yeah. It's really hard. I think it's difficult. And if we're talking about offices and how information and design approaches get conveyed and they trickle down from the top to the founders, design partners, whoever, down to the bottom, it's a really difficult question of how do you do that, because you want some kind of coherency. There is a mission statement behind every office, or there should be. There is something there. And even if it's not expressed, there is inherently a mission statement, because there's 1, 2, or 3, or however many founders. There were founders. They were the originals, right? And even if they don't express the mission statement, they, through themselves, embody the blueprint for the office and for the work. I don't mean blueprint as in like the actual plans for the building. I mean blueprint for like the office and, again, the design philosophy. But how do you have that conveyed to everyone else so that it is focused, but not so much to where you just have a bunch of junior staff at their desk on their own being told, okay, take a crack at designing this thing, and they spend 50% of their brain power on, okay, how do I design it so it looks sort of like something this office would do? And we're okay, yeah, drinking on the podcast. And that's maybe getting off on a tangent, but that is a real challenge, and it's a big problem with offices that get past a certain skill. Probably once you get past like 25 or 30, that becomes a problem, right? Because you don't have the connection between the people doing the work, the younger designers, let's say. Everyone does work, but let's say the younger designers doing the drafting or the sketching or whatever it is, and then the senior people. You don't have that line of connection. So you do end up very quickly with people who are just trying to guess what the partners would like, and that happens very, very quickly.
I think it's the same for
I've been in that situation.
Yeah, no, and because also you don't necessarily want to propose something that's like way out of like what this office is doing, because they're gonna be like, well, what the hell are you thinking here? Like, this is not what we do here, right? Which kind of has some parallels with, like when you pick a studio teacher in school and they have a certain style and students are thinking they should design a la whoever is the teacher, and you're kind of like, well, is that the point? Like, are you basically trying to become an AI of that one person? Mm-hmm. Or can you infuse your design inspiration from that person, but still create your own proposition?
Well, I think school is a different setting. Yeah. But you're right, in an office, there is the reality of, if you're an employee, you do have some amount of responsibility of producing things that make sense for who the office is, so that you're not wasting someone's time and money. It could be yours, the employers or the clients or whoever. I was in an office, and it was a great office, and we had hired this new guy, great individual. There's no assholes involved. That wasn't part of what occurred. But you could almost tell the first day he walked in. I remember I was at my desk, and the first day he came in, I was like, "This is just not going to be a good fit." I just feel it. It's not the right fit. And again, no one's fault necessarily. Well, whoever hired him, that was their fault for not seeing it. But it wasn't. Again, no one was an asshole. So we were working together on something, and I'm very sensitive and very aware of when I'm working on something, when it makes sense, again, at that time for the employer I was working with versus not. Mm-hmm. Because I think I always knew I was going to have my own office. I'm too irreverent to work for someone else. And so when you're like that, and anyone who has their own office knows this feeling, at some point you get tired of playing this game of trying to figure out what makes sense for the ethos of this other person, the founder, let's say. Anyway, so I'm paired up with this new hire. He starts coming up with ideas, and it's a brainstorm session because we're just starting the design. And he has some ideas that are pretty wacky, that wouldn't be my thing, but they do have some sound logic, and they do have reasoning behind it. Like it wasn't just random. But he throws out like 6 ideas, and consistently one after the next, I'm like, no, not going to happen in this office. What's the next one? No, not going to happen. Okay, third idea. No. And unfortunately, I think everyone could tell within the first week that once we started working together, that this was really not going to work, because your thinking is just too different, and the ideas you're proposing are just too different. Again, they weren't invalid, they weren't bad,
just not
but it's not what the office did. It was too wacky, or too this or too that, too whatever, right? And I find that it's a very weird thing that so many architects are constantly preaching that every project we do is different and we approach it that way. But no, you don't. No, you don't.
Well, within a certain genre of vocabulary.
Within a certain genre, yeah, of course.
You're not gonna be designing horror movies, and the next day you're gonna design like movies for kids. Like, they're kind of.
Although, with the filmmaking analogy, there are plenty of directors.
Or a movie for kids would be an interesting concept, actually.
But they're Goosebumps. Yeah, but there are plenty of filmmakers and directors who do switch between completely different genres, and they do it extremely well. It is different in architecture, I think. But that also ties into your point of like learning new things all the time. it's something that I am also grateful for, let's say, but it's an active exercise.
Yeah.
It doesn't automatically happen, right? After you practice long enough, you don't have to learn
Oh
new
no,
things.
I mean, like you said, you could just become, let's say, lazy and just repeat the same stuff and never learn anything new. That's
Yeah.
totally possible. But I do generally think that most architects are curious people, and therefore they are interested in learning new things. Not all of them, but I would say most of them.
I think, and I think I've said it on here before, the reason why more, and this is bleak, more and more architects are less likely to actively try and learn new things on every project they do is because the regulations in the United States, and specifically California, let's say, are so extreme that it takes so much energy out of the office to abide by those things and then learn about these regulations, which are always different and new. And you have a plan checker who's wacky, and city officials and HOA and all this. So you are learning, but it's not regarding anything creative or productive or positive. And all of your creative juice and frankly, just raw energy just gets sucked for that. And by the end of the day, week or month, you're like, yeah, okay, we just recycle what we did before because I don't have any energy left to try and learn something new about this new material I've never used before when we can barely get it through approvals,
Yeah.
There, I've managed to take something positive, making it bleak.
Yeah, I'm glad we're trying to bring some positivity to this show. Thank you, David, for your collaboration. Note number 2, David is still going to be a downer. Doesn't matter the agenda.
Okay, what's the next thing that you love or like about architecture? And I'll also perform my magic and turn it into something dark.
I think it's pretty clear to anyone listening to this.
Dark chocolate.
The other thing that I really love about architecture is it's quite fascinating how you can start from basically nothing, like absolutely nothingness, like an empty piece of land, a shitty house, like no ideas, nothing. And you can turn that into a tangible, 3-dimensional, hopefully long-lasting piece of building, and kind of like I do like that you can create something from zero all the way to like being able to be inside of it. That's pretty satisfying. And actually it's interesting because it's a feeling, if you think about it, right, like the whole process and like what architects do and what a project is and how it starts and how it ends, right, it's fairly long, and it's somewhat pretty remarkable because of all of the things that just could go wrong or are trying to stop you along the process to get to that defined goal, right? But oftentimes you get to that final goal and the project is done, and I don't think you fully realize what you've accomplished. And I do think that
you don't realize it because
you just want to get over. Like you just want to get it done. Everybody wants to move on with their lives. You want to get on to the next one.
Yeah.
And there is kind of like, in most cases, I mean, maybe on like commercial projects or like, there is like a big opening ceremony or there's some sort of party or something. But let's say on residential architecture, right? You design a house for someone, they moved in. Well, they might, invite you to like celebrate and have champagne in their house when they've spent their first night or whatever. Or you might not. And therefore, you never really get that celebrative moment of this is it. It's done. And this is what I've accomplished. Like my work is done. So I think it's important to kind of like think about that, like what you've accomplished, because it's a big deal.
Yeah, it is amazing with these projects. Well, it's very easy to create a building. That's the other side of this. It's actually really easy to do that, to design a floor plan in quotes, design a house, design elevations, and have it get built. But for the more proper architecture works, it is kind of phenomenal to see it, because it didn't have to exist. Like you know what I mean? Like there's no, like we were touring some houses recently, doing some architecture sightseeing as one does. And there, one of them was a Frank Lloyd Wright house. We also saw not chapel. It's a cathedral in LA by Rafael Moneo. Is that right? I think so. And these are proper works of architecture. And that also means that they're atypical buildings. And it's cool to see because it's like, it didn't have to be this way. Like you didn't have to have all these wacky angles or like thin veneer marble for sunlight to come through. You didn't have to do, complicated concrete castings to create this, decorative element. Like none of this was necessary. Someone actively decided that it was worthwhile to pursue this effort to create this kind of artwork. And it's from, let's say, people draw an inspiration, but it's still it's from nothing. Like from a flat piece of land, it didn't have to be anything. It could have been anything, but they've ended up making something very specific, and in those cases, something pretty magnificent. And
I think also it's like recognizing the complexity and the amount of ideas and decisions that need to work together to create a whole, right? Like you said, like that, decorative, fireplace in that house that Frank Lloyd Wright did, for example. Yeah, you probably didn't need it. Like
the Hollyhock house.
Probably just, could have a bare piece of concrete there and call it a day, right? Yep. But like that was part of a bigger narrative that just, continued in all of the other rooms, and it was part of bigger ideas. And how does it come together with the next thing next to it? And how does that relate to like the space that was before that? And how is it made? How is it assembled? Like the proportion, like how far does the pattern extend? I mean, there is like a zillion
so many questions
that goes into that. And I think sometimes it's easy to dismiss or forget how much work was put into it in order for it to happen in real life. Like it's easy to sketch stuff on paper and have a bunch of ideas in your head, right? But like the amount, the power that it takes to get those out of your head, being communicated, have someone else understand it, making it happen, making it coherent, and then being actually enjoyable by someone. I mean, it's kind of amazing.
My interpretation, so one of the things I like about architecture is the same as what you said, but the way I would phrase it is the world.
Typical David Lee. Let me hear your ideas. Now let me tell you how I would phrase that amazing ideas that you brought up that I was not prepared enough to bring up myself, but it's going to sound so much better now. No, you're welcome.
But it's the world building aspect of it. So the creation, when I was a kid, I'm jumping around, but when I was a kid, I read a lot of Calvin and Hobbes, the comic book series.
Yeah, I was never into that.
What?
I don't really know what it's about.
Oh, it's extraordinary.
Yeah, you can try
artist.
And convince me another day. Yeah.
Anyone who's listening who was or is a fan of Calvin Hobbes, you know what I'm talking about. And Bill Watterson he was producing panels just graphically that didn't make sense. He was far beyond talented and putting way more ink on paper and doing these extraordinary, drawings that other cartoonists at the time they were not. They were like, what are you doing, man? You're doing fine art for a cartoon. Like, stop that. I'm trying to draw simple things. Anyway, there was one panel where, and in these comic strips, it's pretty common for the first strip in the comic, because there's multiple lines, right, to be like a little miniature introduction chapter or story almost unto itself. And then the second line is still related to it, but there's a sharp break. And I forget what the first strip is called, but there's something in the comic world that it's called something. It's like the splash line, or I don't know, whatever. And one of the strips that I remember the most is that, again, you have three in that first row, 3 panels. And it's this god, Calvin, the god Calvin, and it's in the drawing is of this kind of Zeus-like figure, from what I recall, and he's creating its entire universes, and the whole panel is about this, magnificent godlike being who creates entire universes and planets and all these ideas from nothing. That's the whole thing. At first there was nothing, and then there was Calvin the god who created this universe. And it's this beautiful thing, and then it cuts to the next panel, and what it is in real life in the next panel is simply Calvin, who's an 8-year-old kid playing with Tinker toys in the living room carpet, But in his mind, that's what he's doing. He's creating this universe, and he's the god of the universe. And that's always stuck with me. But I think there's an aspect of that architecture, not that we're gods, but like that we get to create miniature universes. And I think that's the most enjoyable thing about what I would call architecture versus buildings. When you step into architecture, like the Hollyhock House or the Lady of Our Angels Cathedral City,
Our Lady of the Angels.
Our Lady of the Angels Cathedral in Los Angeles, like these are universes that someone created, right? And sometimes these universes or these buildings are related to other buildings they've did because they're working on ideas that, you know, are kind of being refined as they go on from one project to the next. But still, each project is kind of its own universe. It has its own language, its own details. There's thought to every corner. There's maybe a concept. There's a consistency in the design aesthetics or the language. It's a universe. And the idea of a work of architecture being a little world, which implies a level of detailedness, connectivity between all the parts and a sense of scale, is like really fascinating. And that's like one of the most fun things is when you get to when you're fortunate to have a project that allows you to do that, you know, a client that allows you to think that way, and then you yourself are passionate enough to approach just a house. 2,000 square foot house. There's millions of 2,000 square foot houses everywhere, right? But you approach it as if you're creating this new world. And that's like hyper exciting. And when you get to experience it as a tourist, that's also incredibly exciting. That's why for architects, obviously, we can go to see an FLW house or whatever house, and we could be there for legitimately probably a number of days and be just as excited the second day as we were the first, or probably like the seventh day as the first, right? Because we are decoding and understanding and seeing the nuances of this world that this person created. And there's also an appreciation for just the sheer dedication that the architects and the entire team involved had to create this thing. And again, it didn't have to be this way. No one said like, you must create a world that must be magnificent. No one's saying that, right? And no one's saying to the client, you have to make a building that meets this kind of high level criteria. These are all people, from the client to the architect to the builder to the draftsperson, all working toward something that's beyond average just because they want to. And that's like, it's very, very exciting. It's very exciting.
All right. Well,
I'm excited.
Well done. What is the next thing that you love?
I don't know. I don't know if we can top building universes. One of the things I like about architecture, which is not so much about the work itself, is the people and the camaraderie and this feeling of being part of a tribe. And I think all of us, just generally as people, are always yearning to find our tribe, our group of people that we resonate with. And certainly if you go through architecture school and you practice as an architect, and after all of those things, you realize you do like architecture. And even if in the end you end up switching to being a real estate agent or something, but you still love architecture, there is a commonality between all of us that is a very strong bond. At times, the profession and the community can feel kind of cultish in a non-productive way, but it can also be a very positive thing where there's camaraderie and just an understanding of how we see the world, and again, a shared passion for something. And it's it kind of reminds me, like we were visiting with our friends super recently, and we were and they also lived in New York City for quite some time. And now we all live in different places. And they were saying it's a funny thing because I've learned to appreciate that now that I live in a different state. But anytime I meet someone who did live in New York City for a good chunk of time, we automatically have like this resonance. And we can sit down, we can talk for all night if we want to. They feel not quite like an old friend, but there's something there that just we resonate and we get, and there's a mutual understanding kind of thing. And that, as an essence, is what I would say about architects and architecture generally. Don't get me wrong, there are plenty of architects who annoy the fuck out of me, but mostly because they're just too cynical about stuff, and that's coming from me. But that aside, it's like there's just it's really nice to know that there's a group of people who get it, and we could talk about these things and be enthusiastic about these things all night, all day. I mean, obviously we've done a podcast with 400 and something episodes, and I'm not tired of it yet, right? It's just an endless well of interesting conversation with interesting people who oftentimes have different takes on architecture than maybe we do. Doesn't matter though. It's still something that's well thought out. You know, there's some logic behind it. It's great.
I wonder if that's a feeling that could be found in other professions as well. You know, it's basically like that common passion for something. But I have a feeling that maybe that it's a little bit different for architecture, because architecture is so, I would say complex necessarily, but like made of multiple parts. And therefore the passion could come from any of those parts.
Agreed.
Which makes it like much of a wider range.
Yeah.
Which also could make you more in line with more people within the field of architecture than if, let's say, architecture was about this one thing and we're passionate about that, and therefore, you know, that's it.
The profession does allow for, the study in particular does allow for a lot of different directions to go later on in your life. And it's cool because, you know, someone who does more, they call it experimental architecture, and they're using robotics or like CNC machines or I don't know, whatever things, or they're using mushrooms to make bricks and things like that. You know, right? That's not the, again, more experimental side of things. That's generally not what we focus on, because we don't. That's like heavy research, and you need to allocate like 95% of your time is just research, and we don't do that. We do buildings. But it doesn't mean we don't have an appreciation for that stuff. It doesn't mean it's not necessary and important, and it certainly does not mean it's not worthwhile, you know, or interesting. And I think that is one of the things to probably, as the career advances for anybody in this broad field, you become a little bit more relaxed because you get that there's 100 different ways to go about all the stuff, and it's all cool. And why not? And it's, you know, you don't, I feel like when you're younger, you have to kind of choose a side or choose a lane, or you feel like you have to do that. And part of doing that means also being heavily critical of what other people do.
Yeah.
Which is valid. I think that has to happen at some level, but, you know, at some point in time, you get older, it's not the case.
I think the other thing that I really love about architecture is the construction part of it. Like, I absolutely love construction sites.
Yeah.
And I think it comes back to, like, you know, growing up and like always being around my dad who was making things in the house, and being around tools and sawdust, and like going to Home Depot and buying supplies and having projects and things in his head, and, you know, all of this stuff. There is something very fascinating. There's something very scary about construction sites, because when you, let's say, if you demolish a house or you do a gut remodel and you take out everything, there is this feeling of like, oh shit, there's no going back, right? But at the same time, there is a very optimistic feeling of, we'll put something back, okay? It might not be what you think it's gonna be, but eventually something will be back. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like scary, but also super exciting, because it's like the start of something new. It's like the birth of something new, right? But it's also a patience game, right? You have to be extremely patient and not enduring, but kind of like,
you have to have endurance,
long lasting.
Okay.
To see it through. Mm-hmm. Like, it's not like you go to the store, you buy it, and that's it. You have it. Yeah. Like, you have to be patient. You have to wait. You have to observe. You know, like, it's kind of if Christmas, like the unwrapping of a Christmas gift, was taking you a year to unwrap, right? You start, you know, you get the big box. you're trying to guess what it's going to be. You start peeling off the tape. You start ripping off a corner. You see the color of the box. You're wondering, is it a doll? Is it a car? How big is it? Which one is it?
Right.
You know, and then the wrapper is gone and the package is there, but now you have to get inside the box, and what is it going to be in there? Are you going to be missing parts? Is the battery supplied with the car? Are you going to have to run back after you've, taken out of the box and get the battery? You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of like this elongated process, like very satisfying process with also a big question mark. And honestly, again, like it always amazes me, like how come little human people can build things with their 2 hands and their 2 feet. How can we, use big machinery to like crane things over the city and like transport it from one side of the world to the other and like put it all together and train people and all come as like, hundreds of people on site to put something together in this very specific order. Sometimes somebody thought about the order, sometimes nobody's thought about the order, right? Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like this very intense, long-lasting collective effort into creating this thing. And I think just seeing the transformation process during the construction phases is always so exciting, because even if it's just like a few studs, they've been added from like the past couple of days, like it's like, oh, we're getting a little bit closer, And then you also start to get a little bit more scared because you're like getting a little bit closer, and the room for error is not really there. But it's
it's hope these studs are in the right place.
No, it's kind of again, it's just amazing, like all the stuff that needs to go in the same direction in order to end up being what it's supposed to be. It just amazes me.
The elongated version of unwrapping a gift is a good way of describing it, kind of, because you are working toward this exciting moment when it's completed and therefore revealed, but it is like super, super stretched out. Yeah. And it's so stretched out, and this would be one of the things that I dislike about architecture, is it's so stretched out that it takes legitimately so long that as an architect, it really does impact how many projects you can do in your lifetime. I mean, how many architects have we spoken with?
Positive, man.
Projects take 10 years. Or for clients, it becomes difficult because it's like, this is, my patience is wearing thin. That's why we say so many times, so many times in every project to every client, like, this is a marathon, like, be ready for a marathon. Okay, now you're in the marathon. It's still a marathon. I know you think you see the finish line, but no, we got a lot of turns to go before we get there. But the excitement of getting closer every week is for sure true. I think, as you're describing all of that, it made me think also that's why, I don't know, when we see all of these new houses and they're built poorly, they're done by developers, right? Or a homeowner who, let's say they could afford to do something nicer, but they just chose to kind of hack something together because they're going to move in a year or so and whatever. It bums me out because, like you were saying, humans with their two hands and 2 feet, and what we do, it's in honestly, the way I view it is like when I'm on site and seeing these projects, it's like, this is one of the most fundamental, primitive things that we can do and have to do, and we were put on this earth to do as humans. Like, this is what we do as a species. We cook food and we elevate it to something more than just, sustenance. We make clothing and we make shelter, and then we gather and do other social things. But like the making of shelter, that's like what we do. That's like our species. That's what we do, man. That's what we're here for. And when people don't have any pride in it, it baffles me. Of course, I am an architect, so of course I would say that. But I'm like, but what are you doing? Like, this is what we all do, though. Like, you have only a few chances to build, design, or fund X number of projects, and you're going to do that. That's like it's a massive waste.
It's interesting, too.
You don't necessarily need to spend 3x budget to do something worthwhile either. It's like. It's like it's like you're littering the planet, you know?
But it's interesting too, talking about species and kind of like what is the human species about, and it's about making shelter. It's interesting to think about that, the idea of like creating shelter for your species. If you think about like animals and insects, and the way they make, they manufacture, well, they don't manufacture, but they
Fabricate?
Well, I guess so. I mean, they make it with their little paws and whatever limbs or
Assemble.
whatever.
Okay, yeah.
The way they built their own shelter for what they are. If they're a cockroach, if they're a bee, if they're a bird, right? If you look at the way that those structures are made, I mean, if you look at how a beehive is built, it's insane, right? The amount of logistics and technology and thoughts and process and how it's specific to like how they live, how they function, how they exist as a community, right? Okay, well, there is one design available, all the beehives are the same. There is not like, variations.
Yeah.
But they nailed it, right? They made it exactly what they needed to be, and they're not going to like Home Depot for bees, getting like the cheap stuff to build their hive, right? They're always getting the stuff that they need, and they're very consistent, and they would not like you. Maybe you see a bird that's gonna build a nest out of trash because guess what? That's maybe the only resource they have available around them, right? And they're being very creative in how they're going to build that nest, but you won't see like, I don't know, a bird that doesn't give a shit about building their nest.
I mean? Roger, what are you doing over there? It's not going to perform. Hey, I'm only going to live in this nest for a few months, man. I don't give a shit.
I'm going to move, I'm going to change region. I'm going to migrate. Like, who cares? Like, the level of care about what you're providing to yourself and your family and your bee community and whatever is there. It's non-questionable, right? And it's interesting to think about that and look at the human species where it's like, well, I mean, who cares, We're going to make $1 million saying those piece of crap houses, so just do that.
Yeah.
Like, it's...
But see, that's of course the distinction between humans for the there's some animals and species that blur the lines between what I'm saying, but
there's
for the
always
most part,
a lazy one in the group too, the one that hides and does nothing.
The lazy, you mean Roger, the bird?
Yeah, the cheap one,
It's like, I don't think we need twigs that are, quarter-inch down. I think we can go down to an 1/8 inch. My God, Jesus.
What happened to your eggs? Well, it fell between the twigs.
It was a Roger special. But that's the difference, right, between humans and then animals. Like you said, animals are let's say, programmed, or they've evolved to do it a very specific way, and it's hyper efficient, and it's, for the most part, purely about function, right? But humans, we're not governed by just function. So this is getting more into the philosophy of architecture and design. So I don't get into debates and arguments with people who don't understand or appreciate architecture because it's a waste of my time. But if I did have to have a discussion with someone like that and they dismissed architecture, and the most common way that people dismiss it is that, well, architects just make buildings look pretty.
It's superfluous.
And it's superfluous. It's not necessary. And making beautiful buildings is a big part about being an architect. It's actually not talked about enough, I think, within our community. But I would say, well, that's actually the whole point of being human anyway. There's almost zero decisions we make that are purely about function and utility, right? You don't eat purely based on what is healthy for you. Virtually no one does that. You don't buy clothing just because it performs for you. Even if you're the most utilitarian person who eats canned foods, and for some reason I'm thinking of one of these... what do they call it? Superstores? The people who keep stuff for the end of the world apocalypse.
Oh, yeah.
You have your ammo and whatever else. I'm like, but there's at some point in it, there's aesthetic decisions you're making. And that's the nature of being human. And the nature of being human is, after we've solved the basic utility of whatever the thing is, right? There's another 95% of completing that thing that has to... The questions and answers have to come from somewhere, and it has not to do with utility. So you might not appreciate what architects do, but you still make decisions based on superfluous things. In fact, all of us do. It's what we do as a species. Religion is something we made up. I mean, there's a lot of evidence for this, right? So it's kind of like, to me, doing it in the way that architects do it, that is what it means to be human, right?
Yeah.
That's what it means. And to dismiss it by saying, "Oh, it's not necessary." It's like that's why we're here, dude.
Well,
that's
and I
all
think
of art. That's all of cinema.
I was going to
It's
say that
everything
comes back to
except for-
culture, right?
Yeah, it's culture. It's everything.
If you rip out all of the other things that's not functional, then you take out the cultural aspect of our species.
We're back to being Neanderthals in a cave.
Which, you then erasing, centuries of civilization evolving and discovering themselves and establishing themselves, right? I mean, languages, for example, are obsolete. We could all just be making random sounds and that could be it. As long as you understand I'm angry, you're happy, that's it. We don't need to write books. We don't need to have TV. We don't,
And so because so much of our thinking and the work that goes into completing anything, but let's say a house or a project, is mostly questions that have nothing to do with the basic primitive function of survival. Therefore, it's absolutely insane to me that you wouldn't try to make it magical, because that's what we're here to do. Why else are we here except for to do that, and then to support and love each other? That's it. Yeah. So when people do it the cheap way, well, then there's money as a way to make money at the cost of others, the living experience cost, the quality of life cost. It's pretty close to theft. I don't know. I don't understand it.
Yeah.
It also maybe just stems from a general belief of if you're going to do something, then do it well. Don't not do it well. But
I think it comes back to maybe the idea of craftsmanship and quality and owning and seeing value and investing in those things.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that goes back to the beehive, And now a little break for our show sponsors. Stop juggling multiple pieces of software and struggling with design-unfriendly spreadsheets. Programma, built by designers for designers, provides an integrated suite of tools for every phase of your project, from mood boards to advanced specification tools, procurement tracking to project management. Seamlessly integrated, easily shareable, and always current, Programma reduces redundancy and minimizes costly error. Join interior design movers and shakers by starting for free at programma.design/Second Studio. Experience the difference with Programma, software built for interior design workflows.
If you're starting to laser scan your renovation projects for accurate as-builts, you'll want to hear this. Imagine that you've been awarded a big project, but not surprisingly, your client hands over wonky CAD drawings from 17 years ago. No worries. Meet Integrated Projects, or IPX for short. IPX is a scan-to-BIM platform that converts your 3D point cloud file, which is produced from any major LiDAR camera, into standardized BIM and CAD files. The best part is that they lay out the price and turnaround time instantly. That means starting your interior renovation project on the 50-yard line with an accurate set of drawings in 3D and 2D. Click the IPX link in our show notes to launch the platform for free.
The Second Studio podcast is made possible by support from Autodesk. Autodesk has been part of the design conversation since 1982, providing the tools that help architects around the globe imagine and create beautifully designed, memorable buildings that people love and admire. Autodesk supports the work of the Second Studio, bringing the architecture community together, sparking curiosity, and leading vibrant interviews with the industry's visionaries and thought leaders. The Second Studio works hard to carry the architecture conversation forward, and Autodesk is proud to contribute to this podcast. You can learn more about Autodesk by clicking the link in the show notes.
The thing that I like about our architecture and then also the community is the appreciation for the appreciation for anything that's man-made, and the appreciation for almost anything, even if it's not man-made. Like architects love furniture, they love pottery, they love anything that involves a human being creating it. It's like ultra fascinating to us how that happened, why they made the decisions, how long it took, how much it cost, who was the client, did it sell, did it not sell? Like everything you could possibly think about that object is just ultra fascinating to an architect. That's also one of the dangers of being an architect. You go down these rabbit holes of being fascinated with small things when, you have other things to be doing.
Yeah, that's something that's very interesting. it's like the appreciation and the, reflection that architects are able to have on anything. That probably comes back to like the training where we have to understand, question, listen, analyze, like all of those skills, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which, after you go through architecture school, they just stay with you. You can't just look at something and be like completely like, it just goes through you. Like, some people, they have this ability, and I'm like, okay, that's...
It's like their eyes are just like pipes. It just goes through to the back of the head.
It's like
nothing
the ideas
stays.
go through you, but through a zillion questions, and those questions connect other dots and other dots and other dots, right? And it's kind of like, it's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing. It really fascinates me how we just, like our world, like we just made up everything we live in.
This is what I was saying, though. It's true, and architecture, the structures themselves are like a huge chunk of that. They're a huge chunk of our existence.
What are the most long-lasting parts of it?
Aside from language and
in terms of material things.
Yeah.
Like cars are going to become obsolete. Clothes are going to be deteriorating within a few years after however many washes. Furnitures are going to break, people are going to die. So really
So that's also why I think the architects are just super important. And so are builders and anyone involved in all of that, but particularly the architects, because they're the ones deciding what it should be along with the client. Like that's a very profound responsibility to have, and an amazing, what's the word? Fortunate position to be in. It's super cool. Like, what do humans do? Again, they make architecture, food, and objects and stuff. And really, I design the architecture. That's amazing. And I think that's also why for people who are generally a bit more cultured, they do find architects to be very reputable people. They're like, wow, you're an architect. So, they ask a question like, you must be good at math, and what style of buildings? And you're like, oh no, why did you ask me those questions?
Oh no, why?
All right, what's next on your list of things that you like? What's your favorite thing? Or is that too much pressure? Yeah, or is that too much pressure?
I give you a bunch of stuff.
Okay, then just give me another thing that you...
I think that's it. No, I do love, kind of a random one. I do love technical drawings. It's very specific.
Super specific. Why?
I don't know why. I think because it looks more complicated than it is.
Okay.
Oftentimes, you see a technical drawing like, oh my God, what am I looking at? How do you read this? What does this mean? But if you really look at it, it's oftentimes very clear. Like you don't need to be extremely smart to read a technical drawing. Like usually if it's well put together, you can pretty clearly understand what it's communicating. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I find them very, very interesting again, because it's another way to communicate an idea. I do love, arts and drawings and figurative, drawings or abstract art in general. And they communicate things in a way that's very different, right? Like an abstract painting will communicate maybe like feelings or things that are less tangible in the way that you are perceiving them and reacting to them, right? Mm-hmm. The technical drawings, they just have one mission, is making sure that you understand exactly what the person is trying to accomplish, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like, when you buy furniture, you have to assemble it, and you have that little manual book. Mm-hmm. Like, step 1, grab the screwdriver. Step 2, make sure you have 6 screws, right? Yeah. Which are the diagram, little arrows.
Like, where's the 6th screw?
and I do love those things too, like the manuals, because it's kind of like, I don't need to know what I'm doing. I just need to follow step 1, step 2. And that's just the pure job of those technical drawings, is just to communicate how something is supposed to come together.
I get what you're saying.
In some of the types of technical drawings, there is different, an elevation is just going to show you what the final thing is going to look like. There's no information on it. I'm talking about more like details, like section details or like,
I know what you're saying. I suppose I want to clarify for any non-architects that the drawings that architect produces for legal reasons, the drawings architect produces does not convey how it's put together. It conveys what goes in the thing, and the contractor has to figure it out. But that's not even true either, because the architect is heavily thinking about how it fits together, so what they're drawing makes sense. So it's somewhere between the two. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, so I found them very interesting because that's kind of like their single purpose is to be very specific. Yeah. This is the one corner of the house we're looking at, and we're looking at it from this view, and we're just focusing on this part, and that's how it comes together. And I wanted to make very clear to whoever is going to print that sheet of paper that that's what it's going to be, It
is 2 inches hold. HOLD. Do not fuck with. That's what that means. VAF means, I don't know. We'll see. VF means not my responsibility if it doesn't match. Tip means it's everywhere, okay? So pay attention. Sim means it's too lazy to redraw. So it's kind of like that other thing. You know better.
See more pages in the set.
C structural, not my responsibility. Contractor to verify, not my responsibility. This should be a dictionary of like,
it should be the legend that goes with the set, on the cover sheet or something. But I do like those drawings because of that. I also do like them purely from a drawing form because I do like when they're very well put together, like how complex and clear and precise they are.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, I don't know, very satisfying when you can see that someone put so much time in making this very clear. It's also a way to communicate that I think could be universal in a way because it's a drawing and it's not verbal, it's not a language. People who even don't speak or can read those little labels on it could still see like what we're talking about, which is very interesting to me. And lastly, I think they're interesting because in the process during which you're making them, you are actually thinking about how it's going to work. So it's not just like you're copying what you're seeing. You're not seeing anything. You're seeing it in your head. So you're transcribing the image and the perspective or axonometric view you have inside your head to have those things come together. Sometimes you have the 3D that's open on the other screen. Fine.
Yeah.
But, sometimes it takes a bit more abstraction than that to think about like how does those things come and meet and how am I going to best communicate that detail. Like again, there is like sections, elevations, like
axons,
like again, taking like abstract ideas, figuring out like the best way to communicate the most clearly to whoever is going to grab that piece of paper. I think is very interesting.
There's the fact you listed so many different things reminds me that's one of the cool things and the challenging things, unique things about what architects do is. We are, for the most part, we are tasked with being good at or doing all of these different things, and being the detail-oriented technical person is one of the hats and one of the ways of working that we have to be very, very good at, and that's like incredibly different from going on site and bare land, let's say, and thinking like, what does this site want to be, and then. It could be anything. It could be a circle, a square, a diamond. I'm just like primitive stuff, but it could be anything. That's a very different skill set and interest from what you described, but you have to be able to do both. And most architects, at some point, as your career goes on, you kind of find your path or your focus. So like more senior architects will tend to focus on one of those two things, or there's actually probably 6, but one of the 6 different avenues because they're better at it or they like it more. But in the beginning, you're doing a little bit of everything. And so at one point in time in everyone's careers, they do love what you just described. And I think any architect listening would be like, yeah, I get it. Technical drawings. You get into the zone and you're thinking of that wavelength. But it's like, it's to be honest, like if you're an architect and you do a project from beginning to end, on your own, or rather you're the one that's responsible for most of the work during all the phases, and you're not parsing it out to different people. It's sort of like, I don't know, traveling to like 8 different countries with 8 different climates. Like it's so different. Like, it's so different. Like, the technical drawing is like so different from like looking at the blank site and then thinking about stuff or doing models or doing renderings or selecting materials and then working with a contractor on site. It's like it's all like just none of it makes sense. There's none of it should belong to one person in a certain way. But the technical drawings I do get, it's pretty satisfying. It's also grueling.
It's also, relentless, like windows and door
It's
details.
relentless.
Like the first one's exciting, the 50th one you're tired of it and you want to see something else, right?
But that's but that level of documentation, it depends on the project and the case and all that stuff. But it's also, if you're aiming for a certain level of precision in the final outcome, like things are meant to align. I think I said in one of the previous recordings, if you have a moment where 3 different elements align, like we have a project coming up, we have like a roof thing, a wall thing, and then another thing that have to align. The amount of thinking and work that goes into making that be the case is a lot, because everything behind it has to align. And that has implications to the thing next to it. And that has implications to the thing next to it that ties to that other thing 30 feet away in the other part of the house. And everything's tied together like a quilt, sort of, I guess, or something. And you move one piece of the puzzle and it shifts everything else. And you're like, no, shit, now we're off by an inch here. So we have to backtrack. That problem solving aspect is, super satisfying.
It's like, that's something that, like the problem solving, like puzzle piecing, problem solving is something that is
Enjoyable.
It's pretty enjoyable.
It's also, depending on the work day, the positive of that kind of work is you don't have to talk to anybody. You can just kind
but
of
sometimes
focus.
it's annoying if you're not happy with the solution that came out of that puzzle problem solving.
What do you mean?
Well, like I said all the time, there is always a solution, right? It's just a matter of like how good of a solution can you come up with. And sometimes there is the good ones, and sometimes there is the bad ones, and sometimes there's only not so great ones because, depending on the condition, you don't have that many options.
Yeah, and these kinds of things also quickly bleed over into the people you're working with.
Of course.
On the show, we speak with a lot of different people, and a lot of the non-architects but related professionals that we speak with are extremely successful and extremely good at what they do, which makes sense as to why they'd be on here. But that caliber of individual, which often those projects are only accompanied, by an extreme amount of money to fund a project like that has to be said. Both of those things are uncommon. They're not common, like by definition. And even if we take out the money component, working and finding and being with those kinds of peers is also uncommon. And there is a limit to, there's a limit to what an architect can do, not just in terms of the final building execution, but even the problem solving that you're describing if you're not surrounded by good people. Because if I'm trying to problem solve a exterior, whatever detail, I'll be vague about it. I need to talk to the fabricator. And if the fabricator is not good or I don't trust them, then I'm fighting with one arm tied behind my back unless I find someone better. So that's also the very fun part about it is when you find good people and they're just as stoked as you are to be working on this thing. It's so exciting.
Yeah.
Because they're enthusiastic too. But when they're not that way, that's when it becomes, I just won't work with you again. That's all.
You're on my blacklist. Next.
Yeah.
Big no.
All right, give us one last one to wrap this thing up.
Actually, I don't like about architecture.
Okay, that works.
What I don't like about architecture is when projects are done. No, because, it's kind of like, okay, now here is the handover and I will never see this building again.
That is
It is a weird thing. It's like you get so personal in a way with the building. Again, it came from your brain. It's crazy, right? And you work on it for so long, and you invest yourself in it for so long, and you've been thinking about it for like so many years and hours and months and weeks and stuff, and you know it so well. And then one day, that's it. And maybe you'll be able to walk by, maybe you'll be invited again a couple times and see it age over the years or whatever. Maybe you look on Google someday and find that someone else bought it, and it's just taking a life of its own. And it's kind of weird. Like, I could see how I could never be an architect and a developer, because I think I would never sell the houses that I complete.
Yeah, that's not good.
I just want to hang on to them.
That's not good.
That's not good.
Yeah.
But in a way, it is necessary, because you need to step away from what you've done and just keep going, right? You can't just, keep them and look at them. And at some point, you have to finish them too. That's also the other risk, I think, with architects getting too attached to their architecture.
Especially if they own the property.
Especially, let's say, if it's their house, is that it's this constantly evolving, always changing, never-ending thing that, and you actually end up like living in your own brain physically, And I think there is dangers to that. I think there is toxicity to that. I actually don't know if architects should design their own houses, despite, great architects having done their own houses, which become like really beautiful pieces of architecture that we've all seen and adore and all of that stuff. I would actually be very interested in having someone else design my house, because I do think from a client standpoint, and as an architect being a client, it would be a very interesting experience to be on the other side for once, right? And actually see like what someone else sees in you and the way you want to live in, rather than yourself. Because I do think it's probably a very difficult exercise to do well.
I think living in a house that was designed by someone else would be super fascinating, because you're getting a very up close and personal window into their brain, as you put it, which is kind of a creepier way to describe it. But then you're in it, and you really get to feel their, it sounds so creepy, their like creative essence, you know what I mean? You're in it. But I also think that, look, the reality is that if any architect who's just gifted the ability to design their own house, that implies that for the millennial generation that they have a house and they get to design it, they would happily take it. It's the equivalent of winning a lottery ticket at this point, it feels like. I think I get what you're saying. It's potentially a very kind of dangerous path, but I think it's also.
I don't know if I want to live in my own head. Like, I don't know about that.
I think you're overthinking it, though. You don't have to live in it forever.
Well, that's true too. I could just have multiple houses and
yeah. Sure.
Okay, Marina to have multiple houses.
Plus unicorn. Add unicorn on the list.
With Nutella.
I forgot, what was your last point? What was your last point that you didn't like?
I do not like when project ends.
Oh, when project ends.
But I do think it's necessary.
That's okay.
To all of our clients listening to
yeah, of course it's necessary.
I hope this is reassuring.
It's weird. It's just when a project ends, it's just one of many, So
but in a way, it's a happy moment. But I also feel like in a way it's a sad moment, because it's ending. What keeps us going as architects is the excitement of getting to that point. And I do feel like once you get to that point, it's kind of like, oh, and now what? And now obviously on to the next. But
that is fascinating, because it sort of ties into the question of not specifically for architecture, but for other endeavors. Are you drawn to the pursuit of the thing, pursuit of perfection, pursuit of, I don't know, whatever it is, the process, right? Or are you drawn toward just the reward? The reward specifically. And in a lot of cases for professions and practices and careers, you kind of have to love the process. This is the common thing that's kind of, you tell kids it also, like you have to enjoy the process. Or like when they're entering a competition, parents will say it's not about winning, it's about the doing of it. Of course, it is also about the winning because you want to try hard to win. But it's a way to say if you don't win, then don't be so upset because that wasn't necessarily the point. Although it is also the point. But so it's that kind of thinking, right? And I've never really thought about what you said because I suppose the process takes so long and all of the work is the process that I've never really thought about. I've never really thought about or been concerned with like where does this satisfaction come from and does it come from being completed? Certainly a big part of it comes from being completed, but it's not it's weird. It's not really the creative satisfaction. It's more of a satisfaction of that I'm just happy for everybody that was involved, that we've done this amazing thing. And it's like getting to the top of a mountain, right? It's like we're happy that we're all here together. That's the feeling I have. And usually also by the time you get to the very end of a project, with Project Staggered, you're already working on other stuff and you're in the middle of working in the process of these other projects. And when you're in the middle of it or at the beginning of it, right, that's when you're like fully engulfed by it. So they all kind of just chain link to each other and stagger. Yeah. So like someone who was speaking with probably years ago, I think they were a architect or landscape architect. I don't remember, but we were talking about completed works and they said, to be honest, it's a very weird thing to see our work that's on our website or gets published because he's like, that's like old stuff. That's like from 2 years ago. And the way publications work now, legitimately 2 years ago. And they were right? It's when the project is done, and certainly by the time it gets published, it's kind of like, it's old news. I've evolved. And as you said, going back to your first point, every project you're learning something new so that by the time X project is on the website, I've already gone through or partway through 3 other things. So I've evolved as a person 3 times already by the time everyone else sees it. So it's hard for me to have a strong connection to it. So I don't know. It's an interesting observation you've made, and I've never really thought about it because it's just a continuum.
For me, it's more like I would never think or look at this project again.
Yeah.
And there is something that's just kind of weird about it.
But I don't really want to look at it again.
No, I don't think. I don't think I would want to either. But the idea of actually thinking about it, right? Like you will never look at it again.
Yeah.
Like the photos you get of the project is probably the only thing you're gonna get once it's done, and that's it. Goodbye. And it's weird that you've worked so hard to make this physical thing, and you don't have any parts of it.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, you're making it for someone else. Like you're not the one paying for the construction, so it makes sense. Like you're fabricating something for someone else. But like
you don't have the thing.
You have nothing of it. Like you might have a couple random samples and drawings, and
even if you have a physical model, it's not the same thing. Like the thing itself, you don't even. And that is also true. The thing yourself you make, you don't even get to absorb it or consume it in the way that it is meant to be consumed because you don't live in the house.
You'd actually probably never experience it is, which is also very strange.
If you make a movie, you can watch the movie. A lot of actors don't watch their own performances, but you can watch it. If you make food, you can eat it. If you make art, you can look at it.
Design a car, you could probably drive it at some point.
Yeah, with architecture, there must be other stuff. Maybe like if you design a rocket ship, you don't ride in the rocket. Although that's not really the same thing. But like, you design it, it gets built, and then you're like, some photographs, cool, And the photographs never convey what it's like to be there.
It's never
Even the best photographs, they convey an essence to the project and tell a story. But to be honest, they're like completely different things. Like. I almost can't overstate how different they are. Even if you have, again, the best photographers now or in the past, let's say Julius Schulman photographing Case Study House 22, the Stahl House, the iconic Stahl House, right? That, compared to being at the place in real life or living there, they're so different that they might as well not even be the same thing, like at all. Like they're in different they have nothing to do with each other, really. Like hardly anything. So I don't know. Maybe I need to get an Apple Vision headset. Is that what you're saying? Is that what?
Okay, David deviating to his own personal agenda to get what he wants. I'm taking notes.
But it's a good point. You don't experience it. It's very strange.
It's very strange. Like you actually work on this thing and you never get to try it out.
But that's why also one of the most peculiar things about architects is that we live in the conceptual space so much, and it's all in our minds. Like the project is just in our minds, really. And then we are the ones to author and guide and to kind of steer the ship to have it be created according to what we have in our heads. And then we kind of just vanish. And we go off and do other things. I wonder if
you could put that in a contract, to a client. Okay, project completion, architect required to experience living in the house for 3 weeks before handing over the keys. Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, architects are trained so heavily to visualize, understand, and project, into the future of what this thing will be like physically, but also to be in it, that we have an extremely good sense of what it means to be in the space without ever having to necessarily be in the space.
We do. But I'm thinking, like the more unpredictable aspect of what we've created.
Yeah.
Like that magical moment during the day where the light casts a shadow that makes a pattern over like the fireplace wall or something, like what it means to take a shower in an open indoor-outdoor shower, right? Like that, those are like more like the feelings of what you've created that you can't experience unless you're in the space.
Yeah. Fascinating.
Okay, so note number 15. Yeah. Add to contract, architect required to spend a month.
A month?
Well, let's just make it round. 4 weeks, month.
Well, the thing is, you need to experience the season, so it's really more like a couple weeks
every season, a month every season.
Yeah.
No, but actually, I think, besides like the sensitive experience being in the space, I think it would also be very informative for the person who designed the house. Let's say it's a house, to see the things that were good and maybe the flaws of the design too.
Well, so I think that in an ideal world, the architecture education, there would be a semester or whatever point where it's mandatory for you to design a building of some sort. And it's mandatory for you to exist in the building and use it as it was intended for X period of time. That when I think about it, that makes a lot of sense. Like it's almost like the equivalent of training to be a chef, but then you don't get to taste the food. Mm-hmm. Like, no, you have to taste the food. What are you talking about? You have to like watch your movie if you're going to make a movie as a filmmaker or whatever. And what's weird about architecture, because it's so expensive, it takes a lot of resources and it takes a long time compared to, let's say, other design professions like industrial design. Like you can make a shoe or close to a mock-up of a shoe. You can make, and now with 3D printing, the thing, and it's basically that. You can make the logo and that's it. It's in front of you. But you can't make the house you've designed or the museum you designed, let's say as a student. You can't. So the education process is, a lot of it is, thinking out loud now, is actually, a lot of it's just trying to figure out ways to teach this level of understanding to non-architects without having to actually do it. We do it in a lot of different ways, but that also probably points to the value of physical models and the value of physical installations that you built. Because for sure, renderings, VR, and all that stuff, there is a legitimate whole dimension that's missing from those things and from printouts and stuff. It doesn't exist. Yeah. Like you need to experience mock-ups. You need to build furniture. So even like it's pretty common for architecture students to build furniture. And while it's not, quote, architecture in the traditional sense, you're building the kind of neuron connections between your conceptual thinking, your drawing, and your modeling to the real life thing. And you have to do enough of that kind of stuff for furniture, for installations and different scales and whatnot to then understand what it means to be in a building. That's why also you have to visit buildings, and be absorbed by them. I also wish every time I go to see a house by Frank Lloyd Wright or an architecture by whoever, I wish I could have the plans while I'm walking through the building, because I think it's again, you're building that connection. Like the Hollyhock house, they had a floor plan, and I was staring at the floor plan a lot as we were walking through the house, because the scale and proportion are always a little bit different in real life, especially with those houses, because they were done so long ago that everything, was tight. But anyway, so yeah, it's a weird thing that we do. It's actually a very weird thing that we do, for sure. And kind of like these wizards.
No, I could see how people don't really understand what we do.
Yeah, I could see it now. No, this needs to be the specific color of gray. Like, why? No, it must be. Trust me. Because the architect is, despite the drawing sets, the renderings, and the communications and stuff, there is a lot of, call it meta information, which is the essence, the actual essence of the project, that only exists in the creator's mind, that cannot be conveyed through other things, because it would take way too long, and it would be disproportionate to the amount of time and money we want to spend on stuff. And so therefore having the architect throughout is necessary. You need that person, because they're holding together this vision.
Yeah. All right, well, we managed to stay pretty positive, I feel like.
I think so.
Despite your attempts to sabotage the topic.
All right, that's good. If you are listening to this and you're an architect, give us your favorite things about architecture and why you love architecture.
That would be good. Yeah.
And then we can talk about them on here and just use them as fuel for the podcast. All right, give us an outro.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode. If you like what we do, please support the show. Follow us on all of the podcast platforms, Spotify, YouTube, iTunes.
Where else can people find us?
We're on social media, mostly Instagram, Second Studio Pod. We also have the website, secondstudiopod.com, with all the episodes on there. Leave us a review, subscribe. That's really the best way. Share. It's also a great way to pass the word around, spread the love and the knowledge. Mm-hmm. And we also have the hotline that you can text or call. The number is 213-222-6950. Goes to voicemail, so no chance you get to talk to us. Don't worry.
I think it actually goes to my phone now, and I actually answered the call the other day, and someone was like, "Hello." So, but I won't answer the phone, I promise. But do let us know what your favorite thing about architecture is, and then it'd be fun to hear.
Yeah,
right?
We will. Yep.
Okay, talk soon. Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.